In the middle of a live congressional hearing, Karoline Leavitt muttered 4 words under her breath, words she never meant for the world to hear. But when the mic caught it all, what Jasmine Crockett did next left America speechless. The air in the hearing room was thick with the kind of tension that makes your skin prickle. Pens tapping, papers rustling, the low hum of whispered arguments, until Karoline Leavitt's voice, sharp as a blade, slipped through the speakers. Go back to Africa. The hearing room, with its high ceilings and harsh fluorescent lighting, had all the warmth of a surgical theater. Sterile, unforgiving, a place where words were wielded like scalpels, and every sentence carried the potential to wound. Representative Jasmine Crockett had spent the last 45 minutes in watchful silence, her posture impeccable in a tailored navy blazer, her dark eyes tracking the back and forth between her colleagues with the quiet intensity of a chess master studying the board. She wasn't just listening. She was dissecting, analyzing, waiting for the precise moment to make her move. Across the horseshoe-shaped table, Karoline Leavitt, once the polished darling of cable news punditry, now a senior policy advisor with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, was visibly unraveling. The more Jasmine refused to rise to her provocations, the more Karoline's carefully cultivated poise began to fracture, her sentences growing clipped, her fingers drumming impatiently against the tabletop. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was a controlled blade, sharp, precise, and devastating in its calm. "So let me understand," she began, tilting her head just slightly, the way a professor might when guiding a student toward an obvious truth they were stubbornly refusing to. "See? Your argument is that underperforming schools in predominantly black and brown districts are failing because they lack accountability, not because they've been systematically deprived of resources for decades." Karoline's response was immediate, her tone dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for children and subordinates. "I'm saying excellence isn't optional. Standards don't bend based on zip codes." A murmur rippled through the room. Jasmine didn't blink. "But opportunity does," she countered. "You can't demand a runner to win a race after you've tied their shoelaces together." That was when it happened. Karoline, her face flushing an ugly red, leaned slightly toward the aide beside her, just far enough from her own microphone to assume she was inaudible, but close enough for the sensitive equipment to pick up the venom in her whisper. She should just go back to Africa. The silence that followed wasn't just absence of sound. It was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Someone in the back row choked on a sip of water. A staffer's pen clattered to the floor. Every eye in the room darted to Jasmine, waiting for the explosion, the outrage, the tears, the storming out of the chamber that would give them all permission to react. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. She simply held Karoline's gaze for one endless, excruciating second, long enough for everyone to see the flicker of panic in Karoline's eyes as she realized her words had been heard. And then, with deliberate slowness, Jasmine turned back to her notes, wrote a single line, and set her pen down with a quiet, final click. The chair of the committee, an octogenarian from Idaho who had seen more political theater than most, cleared his throat awkwardly. Let's stay on topic, folks." But it was too late. The moment had already metastasized. Outside the chamber, phones were lighting up, tweets were being drafted, and somewhere in the bowels of the building, a C-SPAN producer was already queuing up the clip for replay. By the time the hearing adjourned, the video was already a living, breathing entity of its own, looped, slowed, captioned, and dissected with the fervor of a viral murder trial. On Twitter, the phrase "Go back to Africa" was trending nationally within 7 minutes. Memes sprouted like weeds, Karoline's face photoshopped onto historical segregationists, side-by-side comparisons of her apology tour from a 2017 racial profiling scandal. News anchors, their voices grave, played the clip on endless repeat, their panels of pundits debating not whether Karoline had said it, the audio was devastatingly clear, but whether this was a teachable moment or a career-ending lapse. Karoline's team moved fast, too fast. Their first statement, released before the hearing had even officially ended, was a masterclass in damage control gymnastics. Ms. Leavitt's comments were taken out of context and grossly mischaracterized. She was engaged in a private sidebar conversation, and any perceived offense is deeply regrettable. The internet predictably eviscerated it. By midnight, the hashtag #GoBackCaroline was trending, accompanied by screenshots of Karoline's past tweets praising civility in politics. Jasmine, meanwhile, became a sphinx. Reporters ambushed her outside the Capitol elevator bank, microphones thrust forward like weapons. "Congresswoman, do you have any response to Ms. Leavitt's remarks?" Jasmine, her face unreadable, pressed the elevator button and said only, "Not yet." That two-word response, delivered with the quiet certainty of a judge postponing a sentencing, sent a fresh shockwave through the Twittersphere. What did she know? What was she planning? The speculation was instant and rabid. The next morning, at exactly 10:03 a.m., Jasmine Crockett walked into the Capitol press briefing room alone. No handlers, no pre-written speech clutched in trembling hands, no American flag backdrop strategically positioned for photo ops. Just her, a single sheet of paper, and a silence so absolute you could hear the rustle of reporters shifting in their seats. She didn't begin with outrage. She didn't begin with a rehearsed soundbite. She began with a story. "When I was 9 years old," she said, her voice softer than anyone expected, "my teacher asked our class to draw pictures of where our families came from. Most kids drew flags: Ireland, Italy, Germany. I drew the Atlantic Ocean." A pause. When I explained it to her, she patted my head and said, "No, honey. Where are you really from?" That was the first time I was told I didn't belong here. The room was utterly still. What happened yesterday wasn't about me. It was about every black child who's ever been asked why they talk white, every immigrant told to go back where they came from, every person who's ever had their Americanness questioned because of their skin or their surname. Karoline Leavitt didn't invent that sentiment. She just said the quiet part out loud. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I could demand an apology. I could call for resignations. But what I want is simpler. I want people to sit with the discomfort of that moment, to ask themselves why "go back" is still an insult in 2024, to wonder how many times they've heard that phrase and stayed silent. When she finished, she didn't take questions. She simply folded the paper, never once having looked at it, and walked out. The clip would be viewed 28 million times in 48 hours. In the weeks that followed, something unusual happened. The story didn't die. Not in the way these things usually do, swallowed by the next scandal or outrage cycle. Instead, it seeped into the cultural groundwater. High school civics teachers played Jasmine's speech alongside King's "I Have a Dream." Corporate diversity trainings added Karoline's clip to their implicit bias modules. Even conservative outlets, after days of dismissive commentary, began quietly editing their earlier takes. Karoline didn't disappear, but she did transform. There were no tearful interviews, no redemption arc media tour. Just a series of unpublicized meetings with black educators and historians, her social media scrubbed of its former partisan snark. When asked months later by a student reporter if she regretted that day, her answer was startling in its simplicity. "I regret that it took getting caught to make me listen." Jasmine, for her part, refused to be canonized. "This wasn't about me," she told a room of starry-eyed interns. "It was about every person who's ever had to justify their place at the table. My job isn't to be their voice. It's to pass them the mic." And then, in a quiet committee vote that made no headlines, something remarkable happened. A bipartisan education bill, one that addressed systemic funding disparities, passed unanimously. Jasmine co-sponsored it. Karoline voted for it. No fanfare, no photo ops, just progress. Now, I want to ask you, we've all been in rooms where the unsaid things hung heaviest. What's the moment that changed how you move through the world? The time you spoke up or the time you wish you had? Drop your story below. Let's keep this conversation alive.